Hello, listeners. Welcome to the Fantasy Garden. Take a deep breath and relax with the freshness of the wind as I tell you a story. At the top of a hill covered with ancient trees stood a tower that time itself seemed to have forgotten. Its stone walls held the whisper of the wind and the echo of footsteps that no longer existed. There lived Rapunzel, a young woman with long golden hair that shimmered like sunlight on a summer morning. Her world was confined to a single window, small, yet wide enough to let the sky pour in. Every day, she gazed at the horizon, wondering what lay beyond the field of flowers surrounding the tower. The woman who had raised her, known only as Gothel, claimed that the world beyond was cruel. She spoke of dangers, of people who lied, and of promises easily broken. Rapunzel listened in silence, believing for a long time that the tower was the only safe place to live. And yet, on certain days, a subtle yearning would draw her to rest her forehead against the window, as if she could feel the invisible touch of the wind that ran freely outside. The hours passed in a gentle rhythm. Rapunzel tended to her flowers, sang melodies she invented herself, and watched the sun drift through the clouds. Every corner of the tower held a story, every wall, a secret she imagined to fill the silence. And when dusk arrived, she would braid her hair and let it fall through the window, not out of necessity, but habit, as if, on some quiet level, she still hoped someone might see it. But one afternoon, a distant song broke through the still air. It was a man's voice, soft, warm, accompanied by the faint sound of footsteps echoing among the trees. Rapunzel held her breath. She had never heard anything like it coming from outside. That sound felt alive, unlike the tales Gothel told. Stories woven with fear and warning. This song, instead, carried something she couldn't name: hope. That night, while Gothel slept, Rapunzel lay awake. Something inside her had stirred, an impulse beyond words. For the first time, the tower didn't feel like a home. It felt like a prison built from promises that no longer made sense. As she looked at the star-filled sky, she realized that perhaps the world beyond wasn't as cruel as she'd been told. Perhaps it was simply waiting for someone brave enough to meet it. And so began the story of Rapunzel, a story of awakening, of the power to hear a song and recognize within it the call of one's own soul. A tale where confinement meets freedom, and fear gives way to the courage to live what was once only a dream. The next morning, Rapunzel woke earlier than usual. Golden light slipped through the cracks in the window and danced across the stone floor. The song from the previous night still echoed in her mind, like a dream that refused to fade. She went to the window, searching among the trees for some sign of that strange visitor. But all she found was the gentle sway of leaves in the wind. Still, something inside her had changed. It felt as though, all at once, the world outside had gained color, and the air inside the tower had grown too small to contain her heart. Gothel, as always, arrived later, carrying a basket filled with herbs and fruit. She spoke little, and when she did, her voice held that firm calmness of someone who did not wish to be questioned. Rapunzel, lost in thought, barely heard her words. She wondered whether she should mention the song, but feared Gothel's anger and kept it to herself. In that restrained silence, the tower felt taller, and time seemed to slow down. Throughout the day, Rapunzel sang. She tried to recreate the melody she had heard, but some of the notes escaped her memory. Her voice echoed softly, blending with the murmur of the wind. It was as if each verse was calling out to someone, though she didn't know who. Outside, the sound drifted through the trees, or perhaps it found its way back to the one who had sung it first. As the sun began to set, the same song returned. This time it was clearer, closer. Rapunzel's heart raced. She moved toward the window, and her eyes widened in astonishment. Among the leaves, she saw a young man dressed in a traveler's attire, his gaze curious and kind. He didn't look like an intruder, but rather someone drawn by something that had also called him. He stood still, listening to her voice, as if he had just uncovered an ancient secret. Rapunzel stepped back, uncertain of what to do. Fear and curiosity tangled within her chest. The tower had never felt so small, nor the world outside so vast. She didn't know his name or why he was there, but deep inside, something told her he hadn't come by chance. It was as though two stories, long kept apart by walls and fate, had met in the same note. And if you're enjoying this story, remember to leave a like, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel. Every gesture helps keep these stories alive and brings new adventures to your quiet moments of calm and comfort. That night, Rapunzel's heart beat too fast to let her sleep. Lying beneath the simple blankets, she stared at the ceiling, replaying the scene over and over in her mind. The young man's face, the way he stopped to listen to her sing. It was something she had never experienced before. The solitude of the tower suddenly felt lighter, as if an invisible crack had opened between the inside and the outside. For the first time, Rapunzel realized she wasn't just an observer of the world. She was part of it, even if she hadn't yet touched it. The next morning, Gothel left before dawn. She said she needed to gather rare herbs and might be away longer than usual. Rapunzel nodded silently, but as soon as she heard the distant sound of the gate closing, she ran to the window. The forest was calm, wrapped in mist. For a moment, she feared it had all been a dream, but then, there he was, the same young man, standing near the trees, looking upward as if searching for an answer. When their eyes met, time seemed to slow. The young man smiled, surprised to see her. Did he call her name? No, he simply raised his hand in greeting. Rapunzel didn't know what to say. She had never spoken to anyone other than Gothel. Her voice, suddenly, felt trapped in her throat. Yet the young man spoke, soft words, carried to her by the wind in fragments. He told her he had gotten lost during a hunt and had been guided to the tower by her voice. He said he had never heard a song so beautiful. Those words touched Rapunzel more deeply than she could admit. No one had ever praised her voice or even listened to her songs. Her cheeks flushed, and a shy smile slipped from her lips before she could stop it. They spoke as best they could, with gestures and words broken by the wind. He introduced himself as Adrian, a traveler and apprentice musician. He said he wandered through those lands in search of new melodies, and that, by chance, he had found the most beautiful one of all. In the days that followed, he returned, always at dusk, always with the same look of wonder. They spoke of the world, of places Rapunzel could scarcely imagine. Forests that changed color, rivers that mirrored the stars, cities filled with voices and laughter. Rapunzel listened with bright eyes, storing every detail in her memory as if mapping the future. Each encounter made the air lighter, her heart more restless, and the tower smaller and smaller. When night fell and Gothel returned, Rapunzel fell silent, hiding what she had lived. She knew the woman would never approve of such a bond. Yet inside her, a seed had been planted, the certainty that life could not be confined to walls and windows. And as she braided her hair before sleep, she whispered to herself, perhaps one day, she too would see the world with her own eyes. Rapunzel's meetings with Adrian became part of her days. Time seemed to flow differently when he appeared among the trees. Each afternoon brought a new story, a new sound of laughter, a new reason to wait for the sunset. The tower, once filled with silence, now seemed to vibrate with memories she didn't want to lose. And yet, fear lingered. Gothel was careful, observant, and it would take only a sharp glance to notice that something had changed in her ward. Rapunzel tried to hide the sparkle in her eyes and her eagerness to sing, but her heart always betrayed her, beating too loudly to conceal. One long afternoon, Adrian arrived carrying a small flute. He said he had composed a melody inspired by her voice. He asked her to listen, and when he played, Rapunzel felt the entire world fall quiet. The sound was simple, yet there was something deep within it, as if each note spoke of longing and hope. Tears came without warning, soft and unstoppable. Adrian looked up, surprised, then smiled. In that moment, they were no longer just a girl trapped in a tower and a wandering musician. They were two hearts that recognized one another without the need for words. When the song ended, the silence that followed was brief but full of meaning. Rapunzel asked, almost in a whisper, if the world outside was truly as beautiful as he described. Adrian laughed softly and said that the world had its shadows, but none darker than loneliness. He told her that beauty lived in the act of walking, discovering, failing, and continuing anyway. And then he added, if you ever wish to see the world, I can show it to you. His words echoed inside her, like a promise made to destiny itself. That night, Gothel returned earlier than expected. She carried new herbs, but her sharp eyes seemed to search every corner. She asked whether Rapunzel had heard any strange sounds or seen anyone in the forest. Rapunzel lied for the first time, saying no, and felt the weight of that lie tighten in her chest. Gothel studied her in silence before turning away without another word. Dinner was quiet, heavy with the tension that grew between the walls. After the woman had fallen asleep, Rapunzel went to the window. Outside, the moon lit the leaves, tracing silver paths through the trees. She knew the secret couldn't last forever, but she also knew she could never return to who she had been. She had tasted freedom, even in small moments, and that was something neither fear nor stone walls could erase. As the wind cradled her thoughts, Rapunzel made herself a promise. She would not let this story end in silence. One day, somehow, she would find the path that led to the world Adrian had described, even if she had to take it one step at a time. The next morning, the sun brought with it an unusual brightness, and with that light came a feeling of resolve. Rapunzel ran her fingers through her long golden hair and noticed just how much it had grown, so long that it nearly touched the stone floor. She had always cared for it as something precious, for Gothel used to say her strength lived within those strands. But now, as the sunlight glimmered upon them, Rapunzel understood something new. Perhaps they were not just a symbol of power. Perhaps they were the key to her escape. When Adrian returned, she shared her idea. She spoke about the tower's height, the window, and the length of her hair. He listened in silence, astonished by the courage that bloomed in each of her words. "It's dangerous," he said. "If you want, I'll come back tomorrow with a rope strong enough. I don't want you to get hurt." Rapunzel smiled and replied that there was no time to wait for ropes, that patience could sometimes be a disguised kind of prison. She had waited long enough. The light in her eyes was new, determined, and Adrian knew, in that instant, that he could not stop her. That afternoon, she prepared herself. Cutting her hair felt unthinkable, yet the thought of remaining trapped was far more painful. She took an old pair of scissors left behind by Gothel and drew in a deep breath. The sound of the blades slicing through the golden strands echoed through the room, and for a moment, the silence that followed felt sacred. The weight of the hair falling to the floor brought with it a strange sensation, loss and liberation intertwined. She braided what remained, feeling lighter, as though the wind could finally reach her completely. By dusk, Adrian arrived, anxious and breathless. Rapunzel tossed the cut braids from the window, secured tightly to a hook. The young man climbed carefully, and when he reached her, they stood face to face for the first time. Neither spoke for a while. There was only the sound of the wind and the shared certainty that this moment would change everything. Adrian took her hand, and together they stood by the window, looking out at the horizon glowing gold, as if the world itself were calling their names. But destiny has a way of hearing conversations never meant for its ears. Gothel, returning earlier than expected, saw something dangling from the window. Fury surged within her. She climbed the tower in haste, her heart pounding with suspicion. When she flung open the door, the room was empty. Golden strands scattered across the floor. She called Rapunzel's name, but only the echo answered. Outside, already far away, two figures moved through the forest, guided by the light of the moon and by the courage of those who had finally chosen their own path. That night, the wind seemed freer than ever. As Rapunzel felt the earth beneath her feet for the first time, she drew in a deep breath. Every step was a discovery. Every sound, a new beginning. And though fear still walked beside her, something greater carried her forward. The certainty that freedom begins the moment we stop waiting for permission to live. The forest felt alive. The sound of leaves beneath their feet, the whisper of branches swaying in the wind, and the scent of damp earth created a symphony Rapunzel had never imagined could exist. Every step was a revelation, every color a surprise. Adrian walked beside her, watching the wonder in her eyes with quiet tenderness. For someone who had grown up confined within four walls, the simple act of walking was a miracle. And she walked as though learning how to live, touching the flowers, feeling the roughness of stones, smiling up at the open sky. Along the way, Adrian told stories of the places he had seen. He spoke of villages filled with music, of squares where travelers traded songs and laughter, of rivers that reflected the sunset like sheets of gold. Rapunzel listened in silence, absorbing every word as if they were promises. For the first time, she was not merely an observer. She was part of the story. Yet freedom still felt fragile, like a flame that the wind might extinguish at any moment. When night fell, they found shelter in a small clearing. Adrian lit a fire and offered her a piece of bread. Rapunzel accepted it with a shy smile, but the simple taste felt new, as if it were the first meal of her life. She sat by the fire, watching the flames dance, and wondered how many other small things awaited her. Gestures, places, sounds that she had never known before. Adrian watched her in silence, knowing that this moment was more precious than any jewel. But freedom, like fire, must be tended. Gothel, consumed by fury and fear of losing control, swore she would find them. She knew every path in the forest, every hidden trail. And while Rapunzel slept with a light heart, Gothel followed the trail of fresh footprints. A mother's love can protect, but the sickly love of possession destroys. She walked through the darkness, guided not by compassion, but by an ancient fear of being alone. Before dawn, Rapunzel awoke with a strange feeling. The wind blew differently, quicker, as though it wished to warn her. In the distance, she thought she heard the faint echo of footsteps among the trees. Adrian awoke too, and in silence, they both understood. Their escape was not over yet. The sun rose on the horizon, bringing with it the reminder that freedom is always a journey, never a destination. Rapunzel took Adrian's hand. "Whatever happens," she said firmly, "I'm not going back." He nodded, and together they walked toward the rising sun, uncertain of what awaited them. Fear was now only a fading shadow, and within her grew a new certainty that to live, even amidst danger, was far greater than merely to exist. Dawn came carrying the distant sound of hooves and the crackle of leaves under hurried steps. Gothel pressed through the forest, driven by a storm of fury and fear. With every tree she left behind, her heartbeat grew louder, not only because of the loss of Rapunzel, but because she could feel control slipping from her hands like fine sand. For years, she had believed she was protecting the young woman by keeping her isolated. But now, faced with her absence, she began to understand that her possessive love had become the very prison she once claimed to protect her from. Rapunzel and Adrian continued on, unaware of the danger drawing closer. They had found a small village where the sound of voices and the smell of fresh bread made Rapunzel smile like a child discovering the world for the first time. Everything was new. The warmth of people's touch, the bright colors of their clothes, the laughter of vendors calling out in the square. She watched it all in awe, trying to memorize every detail. Adrian introduced her as a traveler passing through, and no one suspected the truth behind her story. But Gothel was clever. She knew where to ask questions, studied footprints, and recognized strands of golden hair caught on tree branches. With each clue, her anger grew. She could not accept the idea of losing what she believed was hers. And as the sun climbed higher into the sky, her dark figure blended with the light, a shadow that refused to fade. She swore that when she found Rapunzel, the girl would never see the outside world again. That night, Adrian and Rapunzel rested in a small cabin near the river. The reflection of the moon on the water reminded Rapunzel of her old window. "That's how I used to see the world," she whispered. "From afar, like a dream that never came true." Adrian smiled softly. "Now the dream is real, and no one can take it from you." She believed him or wanted to, but inside, a quiet unease stirred. The forest's silence felt heavier than usual, as if the wind itself carried a warning. When Gothel found them, time seemed to freeze. She appeared among the trees, her eyes filled with pain and desperation. She called Rapunzel's name, her voice trembling between pleading and command. Adrian tried to step forward, but Gothel stopped him with a sharp gesture. "You don't understand," she said. "The world will destroy her. I saved her from that." Rapunzel looked at her with compassion, not fear. For the first time, she saw Gothel for who she truly was. A woman who feared loneliness more than she feared the cruelty of the world. Calmly, Rapunzel stepped closer. She told Gothel she did not hate her, but that she needed to live. "The tower taught me how to wait," she said gently. "Now I want to learn how to walk." Gothel, torn between anger and sorrow, let her tears fall freely. Adrian lifted his flute and played a final note, a sound that seemed to dissolve the weight in the air. In that moment, Gothel understood that love is not control. It is the courage to let go. And though her heart broke, Something inside her was finally set free. Dawn arrived in silence, as if the world itself needed to breathe after what had happened. Gothel left without a word, disappearing among the trees, leaving behind the sound of slow footsteps and the weight of what could no longer be changed. Rapunzel stood watching the forest for a long while, trying to understand what she felt. There was no hatred, nor complete relief. It was a strange mix of sadness and compassion, the kind one feels when realizing that the past, even when it leaves, still walks quietly within us. She knew the cycle had ended there, but the lesson would remain. Adrian stayed by her side, saying nothing. He understood that some silences are not meant to be broken. When the first ray of sunlight pierced through the treetops, he took her hand and said only, "Now life truly begins." Rapunzel looked toward the horizon, and for the first time, she felt whole. No longer the girl of the tower, nor the prisoner of fear, but a woman ready to choose her own path. The wind blew softly, and the rustling of the leaves seemed to whisper that the world was waiting for her. In the days that followed, the two traveled beyond the forests. They passed through small villages, fields of lavender, and rolling hills where sunsets painted the sky gold. Rapunzel saw everything with the curiosity of someone reborn each morning. She learned to plant, to cook, to laugh loudly, to sing without fear of being heard. Every simple act was a fragment of the freedom she had always dreamed of, and now, finally, could touch. One afternoon, as they walked along the edge of a lake, Adrian asked if she missed the tower. Rapunzel thought for a moment and answered, "Sometimes, yes, but not the tower itself, only the silence. It made me listen to who I was before I even knew." Adrian smiled. "Then perhaps the tower served its purpose. It taught you how to hear the world within yourself." She nodded, knowing his words were true. The silence of captivity had become the sound of her own soul. But life, like the wind, changes direction. On a rainy morning, as they crossed an old bridge, an accident separated them. Adrian slipped into the rushing waters, carried away by the current before Rapunzel could react. She called his name, ran along the bank, but he was gone. Despair overtook her. Alone once more, she felt the weight of fear return, but also something new, a strength she had never known. With tears in her eyes, she swore she would find him, no matter how long it took. In the days that followed, Rapunzel walked alone. Every step was a blend of pain and courage. The world felt larger and harsher, yet she was no longer the same. She had discovered that freedom was not just the absence of walls, but the act of remaining true to one's essence. And as she walked beneath the fine rain, a quiet certainty grew within her, that true love does not bind, it awakens. Even in his absence, Adrian was with her still, in every memory, in every sound, in every heartbeat. Time passed unhurriedly, as time does when it is busy healing. Rapunzel learned to live on her own, to care for herself, to understand what it meant to belong to a place, or perhaps to none at all. She kept traveling, helping simple folk, trading stories for shelter and songs for bread. Her voice, now free, was heard in villages as a sign of hope. People said her singing could mend sorrowful hearts, and she smiled without explaining why. She didn't sing for fame. She sang because the sound was the only thread that still connected her to Adrian. One morning, while passing through a village by the river, Rapunzel heard a familiar sound. A flute, the same soft tone, the same melody that had once echoed beneath her window. Her heart leapt. She followed the sound through narrow streets and colorful tents until she found a musician playing for the children. Time seemed to stop when she recognized him. Adrian was there, thinner now, marked by years and travel, but alive. The flute slipped from his hands when he saw her. No words were spoken. They simply embraced, and in that moment, the whole world fit inside two hearts that had waited for each other without knowing how long. Their reunion wasn't made of promises, but of quiet certainties. They sat by the river, sharing what they had lived. Adrian spoke of his fall, of the village that had saved him, of the music that had kept him alive. Rapunzel told him of the roads she had walked, the voices she had met, the nights when the wind had carried the memory of his flute. They had both changed, yet their essence remained, two souls who had learned the true meaning of freedom and love. By twilight, they decided to travel on together, no longer as fugitives but as wanderers. The world was no longer a threat, but an invitation. They walked side by side, discovering new lands and building a life made of small moments and deep silences. Rapunzel had learned that freedom isn't measured by distance, but by the peace of being oneself wherever one may be. Gothel was never seen again. Some said she lost herself in the forest. Others that she went searching for forgiveness. Rapunzel bore her no resentment. At times, she would watch the sunset and think of her, not as an enemy, but as part of the story that shaped her. She knew that without that captivity, she might never have discovered the strength of her own heart, and that understanding made her even freer. In the final scene of this journey, Rapunzel and Adrian walk toward the horizon as the sky turns orange and violet. The sound of his flute blends with her song, creating a melody that echoes through the mountains. It is the song of freedom, the one born when love and courage walk side by side. And so, the tale ends where life truly begins, in the moment when fear gives way to the choice to live. The days that followed were peaceful, filled with small discoveries that gave new meaning to life. Rapunzel and Adrian found a quiet place along the banks of a wide river, where the wind blew gently and the mornings were bright and clear. There they decided to build a simple home, surrounded by flowers and fruit trees. Rapunzel tended to a garden that grew with the same lightness as her soul, and in every blossom, she saw a reflection of all she had learned, that even the driest soil can bloom when touched by love and patience. Adrian, in turn, played his flute at dawn. The music mingled with the sound of the river, and the air seemed to take on a calmness that wrapped their small refuge in peace. Sometimes, travelers would stop to listen and end up staying for a while. The stories they shared were simple, yet they stirred something in the hearts of those who heard them. A longing to begin again, a forgotten reminder that life could be gentle. Rapunzel realized then that freedom could also be shared, and that her voice, once imprisoned, was now a seed for others seeking their own paths. One afternoon, as she watered the garden, she found a small golden flower growing between the stones. She hadn't planted it, but she recognized the same shimmer as her hair. She smiled. It was as if the earth itself had kept a memory of her, a symbol that nothing she had lived was truly lost. The past, she thought, is not a burden when turned into roots. It supports everything that blooms after. As months passed, their home became a resting place for travelers. Many arrived weary and left with calmer eyes. Rapunzel never told her full story. She let the wind do it, whispering it softly, blending with the melody of Adrian's flute. Some said that on quiet nights, the old tower could still be seen in the distance, bathed in moonlight, as if it still held the echo of a time that had already fulfilled its purpose. On nights of the full moon, Rapunzel sat by the river, watching the reflection of the stars. She had found peace. Not a still peace, but the serenity of one who had learned to flow with time, who no longer feared the unknown. She knew that love was not a story that ends, but a journey that continues, built from small gestures and conscious choices. When the wind blew stronger, she closed her eyes and listened to the faint voice of the girl who once sang in the tower, and she smiled, grateful. For now she understood. That voice had never asked to be rescued, only to be free to echo. And that was exactly what she had achieved. A heart set free, able to turn silence into song. The years passed like leaves carried by the wind, but the place where Rapunzel and Adrian had lived remained full of life. The flowers she had planted spread across the fields, covering the ground with gentle colors and fragrances carried far by the breeze. Many said that at dawn they could hear a distant song, mingling with the murmur of the river, a melody with no clear origin, yet one that brought an inexplicable peace. It was the echo of their love, dissolved in the air, preserved by time. Rapunzel grew old with serenity. Her hair, now shorter and silver, still gleamed beneath the sunlight. The tower, long forgotten, had become only a distant memory, a story she told herself on moonlit nights. Sometimes, the village children came to hear her tales of days when the walls were high and the windows small. Rapunzel would smile as she spoke, always careful to remind them that the real tower is the one each of us builds within, and that courage is the key that opens it. Adrian still played his flute, though his sound had softened with age, now full of depth and gratitude. He played not to entertain, but to give thanks, each note a gesture of appreciation for the simple life they had built together, for the road they had walked, and for the lessons that love had left behind. When Rapunzel listened, she would close her eyes and feel herself once more at the tower window, looking at the horizon for the first time. Only now, the horizon lived inside her. One morning, sitting beside her garden, she noticed something curious. The wind blew with the same tone as the song that had once set her free. Then she understood. Time never takes away what is true. It merely transforms it into breeze, into memory, into sound. She smiled, looking up at the sky, feeling completely at peace. Everything she had sought was there. Love, freedom, and a silence that was no longer a prison, but a home. Travelers who passed through that land still heard tales of the woman with golden hair who had sung her own destiny. Some said that at night, she could be seen walking among the flowers, bathed in a soft light. Others swore they could still hear the sound of Adrian's flute drifting over the hills, calling the wind to dance. Perhaps it was only imagination, or perhaps their love had simply become part of nature itself. And so, the story of Rapunzel ends as it began, with a song. But this time, there are no walls and no windows, only the open world, the gentle sound of freedom, and the quiet reminder that no spell is stronger than the sincere desire to live. Because, in the end, every soul that dares to follow its own music finds the way home. Time, with its delicate art of erasing and revealing, turned the tale of Rapunzel into legend. Many years later, when the garden had become a wild field and the river still flowed calmly along its path, travelers would stop there to rest. They said that on the quietest mornings, laughter could be heard coming from nowhere, and on breezy afternoons, the soft sound of a flute seemed to drift from the horizon. No one knew whether it was memory, echo, or miracle. They only knew that there was something about that place that made the heart grow still. The tower, now covered in moss and flowers, still stood silent and serene, not as a symbol of imprisonment, but as a witness to awakening. Its windows were open, and the wind passed freely through them, carrying and bringing back the secrets of time. Sometimes, those who came close swore they could see strands of gold woven into the stones, as if the sunlight itself had decided to stay there forever. It was as though the story refused to be forgotten, choosing instead to remain in the air, disguised as beauty. As for Rapunzel and Adrian, no one truly knew when they departed. Some said they grew old together until the last sunset. Others believed their love transcended time and continued as a song, invisible, touching the hearts of those who still believed. And perhaps that was the truth, for certain stories never end. They simply change form, becoming wind, flower, melody. Today, those who pass through that field find peace. The air feels lighter, the sound of the water sweeter. And if one stops to listen, they might hear a distant voice, soft, gentle, singing of courage and tenderness. A voice that learned how to turn silence into freedom. And so, the tale of Rapunzel is not merely about a tower or an escape, but about the moment when a soul decides to open its own windows and let the wind in. For every prison fades when the heart awakens, and every life truly begins when we choose to sing our own path.